Gigabyte's Flex Display technology automatically detects and connects up to 4 displays for the best gaming experience in multi-display Ultra HD. Click the link in the description to find out more. Hey, what's going on, guys? JayzTwoCents here, bringing you one of those traditional gameplay commentaries. If you have no idea why you're looking at some gameplay on the screen and you're hearing me talk, well, this was actually the way I started my channel way back in the day, where I used to play some games. Yeah, believe it or not, I used to play some games. And then we would just talk about a fun topic that was interesting, educational, and maybe you got something out of it. And it was more fun to watch gameplay than it is to look at my ugly mug on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and spare you guys the pain of taking a look at me. And we are going to watch some Battlefield 4 Zavod 311 gameplay here. Not too bad. It was a decent gameplay, playing as an engineer. What else? Very exciting. Just, well, the most exciting thing that's happened to me today, anyway, was having a decent game here in Battlefield that didn't crash. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about today's topic, which is how to maintain your water cooling loop. There's a lot of information out there when it comes to how to maintain your custom loop, and there's actually good information and there's bad information. And I've actually got some pictures I'm going to show you today that is going to be both educational and maybe a little bit eye-opening, and at the same time, a little bit controversial. And we like controversy around here. Keeps things exciting. Keeps you on your toes. Or at least it keeps me on my toes. Or you guys do. Something like that. When it comes to custom water loops, you guys, the easy part is actually picking the parts and putting it together. The part that people tend to get really hung up on is how often do you have to flush it? Do you have to flush out the rads before you put it together? You just don't know what to do. And we're going to simplify that for you today. Now, when it comes to putting together new parts, typically the blocks and things are pretty well fleshed out and nice and clean. The radiators, there's a lot of different brands out there, and everybody treats their radiator manufacturing process a little different. Now, radiators are soldered together, and with that solder, there's what's called flux. And that flux basically is kind of a byproduct of the soldering process, and it can get kind of dirty and flaky, and bits of it can break off and start floating around your loop. Now, when it comes to building my systems, I tend to just use hot water with some vinegar, swash it around, and then keep replacing the hot water and keep doing it quite a few times until you get as much junk out as you possibly can. Now, why do you want to keep replacing the hot water? Well, guess what? As you swish that radiator around and you're putting that hot water through those fins and through those rows, it's actually cooling it. Yeah. So anyway, I do recommend just a vinegar flush when it comes to your brand new radiators. It's not going to hurt anything. Most of the time you'll be just fine, but why take a chance? You don't want a little piece of that breaking off and killing your brand new pump. That would be a terrible, terrible day. Now, when it comes to the fluids, the other thing people get very, very hung up on is how often do you need to flush your system? Now, flushing means taking out all the old fluid, cleaning out the system, and replacing it with brand new fluid. Now, fluids have changed over the years. In fact, fluid has changed much more dynamically than the parts have. The way a radiator works and the way a heat sink or copper block works is really basic. It's a piece of metal. It's got lots of fins on it to give it a larger surface area, and as the fluid runs over the block, it cools the part that it's touching, and as the fluid goes through the radiator, the air moving through it removes the heat. It's very simple the way the heat exchanger works. It's just like it works on a car. But when it comes to the fluids, it's actually quite a different story. You've got nano fluids out there, you've got old school fluids like Fluid XP, you've got distilled water, and you hear everybody swearing that their distilled water or their fluid or their deionized water is better than the competitor, and it probably is the most confusing part to buy, is the fluid. Well, for the most part, guys, how often you need to change that fluid depends on what kind of fluid you're using. Now, in Skunkworks, I am using a nano fluid. I'm actually using a Mayhem's Pastel, which is basically a nano fluid inside of a distilled water mix. You mix it yourself, you put it in. It's actually got a shelf life of 2 years, and it's equally as good in your system for 2 years. Now, when it comes to distilled water, that's something you tend to want to flush out a bit more often. My recommendation is 6 months. Every 6 months, you should be emptying out your loop completely, be running brand new distilled water through it, and some antimicrobial like a biocide or a what's called a PT nuke, a couple of drops of that, just 2 or 3 drops. You put too many drops of that in there, you're going to coat your system a nice aqua shade of blue, which is terrible. Yeah, it looks awful. I've done it before. Now the other thing that people ask when it comes to maintenance is their tubes. They've got clear tubing and they're wondering why the heck their tubes are turning cloudy. Well, here's the reason that happens. Rubber tubing has what's called a plasticizer in it. But basically the plasticizer will start to leach out of your soft tubing and it will start to coat the inside of the tube, which gives it a very cloudy look. Sometimes people mistake this cloud for being a fault of the fluid, and that's not the case. In fact, nanofluids will never do that to your tubing. But distilled water-based non-nanofluids will tend to do that because they have anti-corrosive compounds in there which tend to also exacerbate, funny word, exacerbate. It will tend to exacerbate the leaching effect of the plasticizer. So that's why I tend to not use clear tubing when I can avoid it, because clear tubing, no matter the brand, Tygon, or other types of plastic, I don't pretend to be an expert on plastics, will always eventually show that leaching, that nasty cloudiness. There's nothing you can really do about it. Now when it comes to acrylic tubing, there's really not a whole lot you got to worry about. It's a hard tubing, it's non-porous, and nothing is going to ever leach out of it because there's nothing in it. It's just solid acrylic, or whatever that other material is. Forget, again. If it's a rigid tubing, you don't have to worry about anything leaching out of that. Now I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here. This is actually a system that I ran for 5, almost 6 years without ever bleeding the system. And that system, as you can see, the tubing used to be clear and it turned a lovely shade of peach. Very Golden Girls-ish, 1990s looking thing. I have no idea why it turned peach. If you guys look, the actual coolant is green. This was a Fluid XP fluid, which was one of the very first aftermarket fluids you could buy in the mid-2000s, early 2000s. I have no idea why it turned peach. But as you can see, the coolant stayed nice and green. Now if you look here, when I drained the fluid, we got a bunch of little debris down in there. I wasn't too sure where that came from. So I decided, well, this particular system, since it's not going back together, let's go ahead and cut this sumbitch open and let's see exactly where that was coming from. Well, as you can see here, this is a Coolant's solid copper water block, and it tarnished bad. Really, really bad. In fact, all of those little brown flakes came out of this water block. I have no idea why, but it did. Now when it comes to the GPU block, it's an old school EK block. I mean, look at that logo. That's, if you can't tell, that is just really old. I mean, it actually looks very, very retro if you ask me. Things have changed quite a bit for EK, but you can see the passages and everything inside the block are just as clean as the day it was put together. This is exactly the way it came apart after being ran for 5 years. No tarnishing of the copper, everything looks fantastic. Now if we look inside the radiator, this is a Black Ice GT radiator. It was a different story. You can see there's a lot of gunking going on one side of the radiator, and the other side is actually fairly clean. Now the gunking was actually building up on the inlet side, and that's where all of the fluid was having to kind of swirl around in there and make its way in the row. And then the exit side of the radiator, because it was smoothly flowing out of the rad, was not having that gunky buildup. So that gunky buildup, as you can see, was kind of gross, and you don't want that floating around in your system. But all in all, it actually was very, very clean. I mean, the pump itself also had some gunky buildup in there, but this wasn't really a problem for the parts of the time. Now, this system was actually built in 2006. Now, as you can tell, parts have changed quite a bit. Now, this system was able to run 5 years without any major issues because if you look closely, both the CPU block and the GPU block have very large passages. Today, they cut these passages very, very fine. And that gunkiness would have, over time, clogged up these blocks, at least the way the blocks are built today, and you would have ended up having a terrible time of keeping your system cool. You would have exerted your pump, and you would have eventually experienced a failure. Now, I don't recommend running your system for 5 years simply because I did. What I wanted to show was how far we've actually come in the last 5 years when it comes to the technologies in these blocks and the way that they're made. So I would highly recommend flushing your system at least once a year, even if you have a nano fluid. Once a year is definitely recommended. Now, if you're going to be doing a custom water cooling loop and you don't want to pay 30, 40, even 50 bucks for your fluid once a year, well, then maybe you shouldn't get into custom water cooling loops because with them comes a bit of maintenance. Now, you're not going to have to worry about the tubes cracking or coming apart or leaking or any of that. If for the most part, as long as you have a nice solid connection at your fittings, you're never really going to develop any sort of leak. As you can see, these blocks and things are held together with O-rings, and really, that's not changed. You're not going to have any sort of leak issues coming about of these products. But once a year, fluid flush is really all you need. If you're running a distilled water, like I said, 2 or 3 drops at max of PT Nuke or antimicrobial or a biocide, you don't want algae building up in your loop. That is kind of the worst case scenario, is having algae build up in your loop. And if you can keep the algae at bay, corrosion isn't really an issue anymore. Even distilled water tends to not really pick up too much of the ions that are in the metals, and I found that basically conductivity is not an issue as long as you continue to keep your system nice and clean and change out that fluid at least once a year. So guys, this has been JayzTwoCents talking about how to keep your custom loops maintained. It's really not that hard. If you built your system, you can maintain it. Drain it, just run some distilled water through it, drain it again, refill it. That's it, guys. Very, very simple, and I hope you enjoyed those pictures that I showed because they're actually a little bit educational. Not many people are willing to cut open their radiators, but I did it for the sake of science. All right, guys, as always, we will see you in the next one. Kind of normal for all of the classified GPUs, not just the 980, but the 780 and the 680. They were all taller GPUs because they're fitting an awful lot onto the PCB. Yeah, we'll talk about the back in a minute. Don't worry, we'll get there.